So please allow me to introduce a pair of individuals that have deeply studied the topic. Welcome to the virtual stage, Batya Friedman and David Hendry, both faculty members from the University of Washington. Batya Friedman is a professor in the Information School, adjunct professor in the Department of Computer Science, and adjunct professor in the Department of Human-Centered Design and Engineering. David Hendry is an associate professor at the Information School, where he teaches courses in human and computer interaction, information system design, and foundations of information science. Now, let me share why it's so important that they've come to the Keen National Conference and are going to share. They're the founders of the Value Sensitive Design Lab. They're also the authors of Value Sensitive Design, Shaping Technology with Moral Imagination, a publication from MIT Press. I had the pleasure of meeting them in connection with a Keen partner and within a workshop in this conference. The Value Sensitive Design Lab is their base camp for collecting and sharing years of work that aim to provide faculty and students tools for navigating value tensions. Please welcome them to the stage.
Hi, my name is Batya Friedman. I'm really happy to be here to spend some time with you sharing about value-sensitive design, and my close collaborator, colleague, Dave Hendry is here with me as well. So we'll go to the slides and go from there. So I'd like to begin by talking about our project for the day, and our topic here is on a value-sensitive design and to provide an approach to accounting for value in the engineering process. Now, in the work that you've been doing with Engineering Unleashed, you've been focused on the entrepreneurial mindset. And as you know, the core pillars here are curiosity, connections, and creating value. All of these are essential to value-sensitive design. And in this particular talk, what I want to do with Dave is help you see how the approaches and methods developed in value-sensitive design can be helpful to you as you think about creating value within the entrepreneurial mindset that you're working with. And of course, in this work, we take a very broad view about what constitutes value. So it's both economic value, but it's our moral and ethical values, our social values, our personal values. All of those are essential to how it is that we design and build the tools and technologies that we bring forward into the lives that we lead. I want to mention too that Dave and I have been doing this work over close to 2 decades and with a wide range of people. So please know that there are many, many people who have been working on this project with us, including some of your colleagues here from Keen, particularly Kari Watkins from Georgia Tech. So to begin, I want to talk about moral imagination and technical imagination. How is it that we take these 2 different ways of imagining and bring them together into the same engineering process? To give you a sense of what I mean, I'd like to start by just reading from the introduction of the book that Dave and I have recently written. And the book begins with a quote from Rabindranath Tagore from 1922. Tagore writes, "The water vessel, taken as a vessel only, raises the question, why does it exist at all? Through its fitness of construction, it offers the apology for its existence. But where it is a work of beauty, it has no question to answer. It has nothing to do but to be." So in these few words, Rabindranath Tagore gently points us to the human condition. So Dave and I write, "We learn from Tagore that being with our tools gives consideration not only to functionality, not only to the things that we make and what they allow us to do, but also to human flourishing, to what it means to really be a full human being and be able to live out our lives in the way in which we would like to." Thus, retelling Tagore's story of the water vessel, we might say, every human being is entitled to clean water to drink. That's an ethical commitment. And a vessel from which to drink that water, that's a functional commitment that we need to make good on that ethical commitment. and that vessel should be beautiful. So our commitment should be not only to the function, but also to the full experience of how we live our lives as human beings. And that's what we mean by bringing together our moral and technical imaginations in the technical work that we do. Over the years, we've settled on a relatively simple working definition for human values. What is important to people in their lives with a focus on ethics and morality? You know, the moral philosophers have been working on trying to define ethics, morality, human values for thousands and thousands of years, and there's still great debate. But as engineers, as people who are going forward, building the tools for society, we need something that we can hold on to, because society and engineering processes do not wait until the philosophers have finished their work. And so we found this very simple definition useful to us as we do the work that we engage in. I think it's also important to realize that tool use is a fundamental part of the human condition. Our tools shape how we interact with and experience the world, which in turn leads to new tools. Or as Winograd and Flores write, in designing tools, we're designing ways of being. So the very tools that we build shape how we experience the world. For example, right now you're experiencing my ability to give a talk through a very elaborate technology. And that shapes how you experience the kinds of conversation that we're going to be able to have in the next hour. So this is one of my favorite tools. I happen to have it right here. It's a flat edge screwdriver. And you can see that it's good for turning tools. And in fact, it's good for turning screws. And in fact, those screws have also been designed so that they fit with the screwdriver. So that is, the tool infrastructure is not just the tool itself, but everything else that goes along with it. Now, this is good for screws, but I've also used it in the fall when I'm planting bulbs. I go out into my backyard and I use it to dig holes. And if I have a paint can that I need to open, I can go ahead and lever that lid and use it as a lever to open that paint can. But if what I wanted to do was ladle soup, this tool would not be so good for that purpose. So it's in that way that we can see how technology shapes human experience, which in turn shapes our human experience and vice versa. It enables what's easy to do, what's hard to do but doable, and prevents what's impossible to do.
Well, thank you, Batya. I think we need to advance this slide by one. There we go. So I'm going to continue our discussion of some of the theoretical foundations of value-sensitive design. And to start things, I'd just like to note this dam here. This dam can be used for many things, including controlling the flow of water and preventing floods. But we see here two young men who are using it as a good fishing spot on a warm afternoon day. And we can see that this dam offers that affordance, but there's also danger associated with where they are fishing. So tools can be handheld tools, of course, but also infrastructure tools. Value-sensitive design is an interactional theory and method that accounts for human values in a principled and structured manner throughout the design process, the design and engineering process. This is the definition that we work with. When we speak of values, we always speak of them in terms of a web of values. Values do not live in isolation. So if we're concerned with privacy, for example, we might use a working definition such as the right to be left alone. And when we work with that definition, other values come along as well. For example, trust and safety become associated with privacy, so that it's very difficult to consider a value in isolation. We're always working with values in combinations and in webs. And because of that, we speak of value tensions rather than value trade-offs or value conflicts. when we work with the concept of tensions, that gives us an opening to consider solutions that resolve the tensions and the connections between more than just one value. In our projects over the years, we've worked with a variety of different kinds of stakeholders, both human stakeholders, individuals, and institutions, along with non-human stakeholders, such as the snow leopard that you see on the top row. In value-sensitive design, we make a key distinction between direct stakeholders, those who are directly using a technology. Sometimes direct stakeholders are called users, for example. And in contrast to direct stakeholders, we also consider indirect stakeholders in the design process. Indirect stakeholders are those who are impacted by a technology but don't directly interact with it. A classic example of this is the patient and a medical record system. The medical record system might have originally been developed for doctors and insurance companies and the healthcare system, and patients might have been excluded from the design process and might not even be able to interact with their own records. So we can see here that indirect stakeholders often have a very high stake in a system, even though they don't directly use it. We've also worked at a variety of different levels of human experience, from individuals who have implantable medical devices, such as pacemakers, all the way up to problems of international justice. And we have found that at each of these different levels, value-sensitive design theory can be helpful for understanding the design space and for creating solutions. Value-sensitive design works within a tripartite methodology of conceptual, empirical, and technical investigations. Conceptual investigations are foundational, connected to the working definitions of values that we're using, how philosophers and lawyers, for example, consider a value. Empirical investigations are focused in particular contexts and situations where people are engaged, and social science gives us methods in a toolkit for understanding how people are engaged in contexts. Technical investigations are all about the technology, its affordances and what it can do well and what it can't do so well, how the technology is shaped and the materials that make up the technology. The important thing to keep in mind about the tripartite methodology is that each of these different kinds of investigations can be integrated. So we're learning as we do conceptual investigations what we need to attend to when we consider a technology. And once we think we have a good solution, then we can investigate it empirically by observing, for example, how stakeholders are engaged with it. The second thing to attend to is that we iterate through these different forms of investigations on any given project.
So about this time, you might be asking yourself, well, what's a technical decision got to do with it? You know, here we are talking about engineering and all of the kinds of really thoughtful and careful technical decisions we need to make in the building of systems. How is it that those technical decisions relate to the kinds of moral and ethical issues that we're bringing forward? So I'd like you to consider for a minute a system that is being designed at a university to help support communication among students. And in designing that system, what we might do is think about how two students, two undergrads, might get together, and they might want to have built into the system some kind of scheduler for some kind of virtual meeting. So if we were doing something like that, as the system designers, we probably need to make some decisions about units. You know, how long will this be? How will students indicate when it's going to start? What the duration will be? Those seem like fairly straightforward technical kinds of things that one would need to decide. But think about this. There's both what's known as absolute time. That's the exact time that we might indicate by saying class starts at 10:30 in the morning and it ends at 12:20 in the afternoon, versus what we might call situational time. Situational time refers to time that happens when a certain event occurs. So, for example, there are some cultures and some places where classes end when students no longer have questions to ask and their teachers have finished answering those questions. So we could imagine at the university, when we're meeting in person, the absolute time is really important because we're talking about sharing physical space. But when we're meeting remotely, perhaps there's greater flexibility here. Perhaps we could shift to some kind of situational time and think about supporting education in ways in which people remain in the room until all the questions have been answered. But more to the point, you can see that in making a very simple technical choice, a technical decision, because we are talking about things that affect human beings and human beings live in a very complex interrelational way with each other, that those technical decisions actually implicate and have social, emotional decisions, implications for the human beings who'll be using those systems. So we'd like to turn now to two real-world examples.
Okay. Well, thank you, Batya, for passing the baton. So I want to come back to the tripartite methodology, and we'll explore how this methodology, how the tripartite methodology works in action. So here's the situation. Suppose we're investigating robots for healthcare, and suppose we're working within a ethical framework called care ethics. And within care ethics, two concepts are really important. One is that we can care about something, and the second is that we can care for something. And so our colleague, Amy van Weisberg from the University of Bonn in Germany, asked this question some time ago. Amy's an AI ethicist. She asked, how can robots be designed in a way that supports and promotes the fundamental values of care? And so we might imagine a care robot that has a lifting capacity, a capability to lift a patient and to move the patient from, for example, a chair to a bed. And we can see here that the robot and the patient are looking at each other, but obviously the kind of connection that occurs here is between a robot and a person. It's not a real connection. At least some people wouldn't consider it a real connection. An alternative use of AI technology would be to create an exoskeleton solution where a nurse, for example, wears the exoskeleton, and this augments their body so that they have the capacity to lift a patient from one place to another. And with this solution, the nurse and the patient can maintain a contact, a relationship by looking at each other. So both systems might do quite well on safety, reliability, and cost criteria. Both the care robot and the exoskeleton might be more or less the same. However, when we put in the criteria attentiveness, that is a concept related to care, how well the nurse and the patient can attend to each other, the exoskeleton seems to be ahead. Now, what we might do is we might return to the tripartite methodology, and we've done a very careful investigation through care ethics, and then we've done some technical work to decide which of our criteria make the solution the best. So we might move towards an exoskeleton solution. But we might go into the field and conduct an empirical investigation and see how nurses adopt an exoskeleton and use it in a particular care context. And we might find that nurses actually don't want their bodies to be augmented by a robot type technology, and they reject that because they just don't like it. So that leads us towards new technical innovation. For example, here's an auto lift that allows the nurse to directly attend to the patient and the reverse. And the technology also gives the augmented functionality of being able to lift the patient. So if we return to our engineering criteria, we see that the auto lift not only allows for attentiveness and is good on the other criteria of safety, reliability, and efficiency, but also supports the new criteria that emerged through the empirical work, that is bodily integrity.
So the example that Dave has just been talking out with you is an example that involves one or two people in a very contained environment around a very contained technology. So there's the patient, there's the caregiver, and then there's some kind of technology that helps with lifting. And you've seen how the value-sensitive design approach and the tripartite methodology can help you make progress there, both in terms of the process of conceptualizing what care might be, also by the technical work that's done, and also by the need for empirical work, and also the way in which the values that you identify can work as criteria for evaluating systems. But what I want to do with this second example very briefly is illustrate how that same approach that we've applied at a very individual level can also work at the field level. So across all of these levels of human experience, and also the ways in which we think about knowledge. And this is an example that has to do with the invisibility of the materiality of IT. So I don't know about you, but when I think of the cloud, I think of these great white fluffy things that are kind of ephemeral and just kind of float up there without a whole lot of stuff associated with them. However, when we use the word cloud as both a metaphor and a mental model for IT, what it's actually referring to is tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of servers, massive devices that are sucking lots of electricity, generating lots of heat that needs to be cooled by using vast amounts of water, has been built with extractive metals from the earth. It's anything but the ephemeral thing that I associate with clouds. So the point here is simply that as a field, the information systems and technology field has given the public a way of thinking about the places where we're storing data that is ephemeral and has very little materiality to it, when in fact that's the antithesis of the reality. And so when we design our metaphors and the mental models that we give to the public about the engineering artifacts that we build, I think it's incumbent on us to do so in a way that is reflective of the essential elements of those technologies, so that the public is enabled to think with them as well. And by public, I mean a very broad public. So I mean the general citizenry, but I also mean policymakers and other non-technologists, because this is the way in which they talk about the results of the kinds of things that we invent and then deploy in society. And with these two examples, I hope what you've seen is that the approach of value-sensitive design is really quite robust to the kinds of both technologies that it can be applied to, but also the level of human experience and the level of knowledge that it can also be applied to, and be helpful to us in how we engage with value then in our conversations around these technologies. So that's been a lot of talking on Dave's and my part. And we thought what we'd like to do in the next 10 minutes or so is give you a chance to try out some of the methods, at least one method from value-sensitive design, and try to get a feeling for what would it mean to really think in this way in relation to a particular activity. So if you happen to have some scratch paper and a pencil nearby, that's great. And if not, just a little active thinking, that will work too. So what I'd like to do is share a design prompt with you. This is about sleeve. Sleeve is a hypothetical embodied technology which uses a brain-computer interface to detect the wearer's affective states. So I've got an implant here at the back of my brain that's going to detect my emotions, and it's going to display those affects through an e-textile garment, so in my garment. The fabric that I'm wearing can change colors, texture, shape, according to the feelings of the wearer, so whatever it is that I'm feeling. Sleeves can be worn by people, such as those with autism, to help make their emotions more accessible to the people around them. So this is the technology that we're going to be thinking with as we do this design activity. And the tool that we're going to use is a toolkit that we've developed in the Value Sensitive Design Lab called the Envisioning Cards. These have been around since around 2011, so and still very widely in use. Each of the cards has a provocative image and a title. This one is called Perceptions of a Value. And then the cards in the original suite had 4 suits. So they talked about stakeholders, as Dave talked about, indirect and direct stakeholders. They talked about time. They talked about values, as you see this card is, and pervasiveness, widespread uptake. On the flip side of the card, you see the suits, you see the title, and then on one side you would see a theme, and then on the other side in bold, a very specific design act that you could take, and an active verb for how to engage. In this case, it's investigate. So what we're going to do is take a couple of these cards, and you're going to have an opportunity to use them as a way to think through or ideate around the technology of sleeve. So here's sleeve again. Remember, this is the embodied technology. I've got that brain-computer interface here to detect the wearer's affective states, and it's going to display it on whatever it is, this e-textile garment that I'm wearing. So this is our design prompt. And the first card we're going to use is a stakeholder card called Consider Children. And it says that children often appropriate systems originally designed for adults. How might this system influence a child's social and moral development? So that's the prompt that I'd like you to think about. You can just consider children. You can consider that particular theme. And I have a 3-minute timer here. I'm going to flip my timer over and give you 3 minutes to think about sleeve through the perspective of considering children, and jot down whatever kinds of issues or ideas come to your mind in relation to this prompt. Okay, go ahead. Start now. Okay, I'm going to ask you to begin to finish writing your last sentence, dotting your last I, crossing your last T. And we're going to use the chat as a way to collect people's ideas. So if you had an interesting idea that occurred to you while you were considering children, just go ahead in the chat and write "consider children" for the card and a colon, and then just one brief sentence about what your idea was. And you can go ahead and begin to do that now. Okay, we're out of time, so I'm going to ask everyone to stop there. And as I said, if you do have something interesting that occurred to you, go ahead and add that in the chat. And I'm going to go to a second card. So we've taken children and we've used that as a lens now to look at sleeve. Now what I'd like you to do is take the card here that's about value tensions. It tells us that value tensions occur when supporting one value challenges another value. And sharing, for example, sharing more information in a social networking system may support sociability, but reduce privacy. It can also occur within a single individual. So within myself, between conformity, say, versus autonomy. It can be between an individual and a group, so individual privacy versus national security, or across different groups. You know, a culture that values independence versus a culture that values interdependence. So what I'd like to ask you to do now is go ahead and apply this card of value tensions as a lens to the design prompt of sleeve. And again, I'm going to flip over my timer here. So there you go, 3 minutes. Please start. I'm going to again begin to ask you to finish that last sentence you're writing, dot that last I, cross that last T, and again, invite you, if you had an interesting idea, to contribute your idea to the chat. So again, write the name of the envisioning card, value tensions, and a colon, and then jot down what your idea is in the chat to share with the rest of us. And we have just a little bit more time before we finish up. Okay. So with that, we have Doug Melton with us, who has access to the chat. And I'm going to invite Doug to share with us a couple of comments that people wrote from the Consider Children card and a couple also from the Value Tension card.
Excellent. And, I'm going to also mention something that's going on with our conference even before we start that book offer that's connected to value sensitive design. There are many people, I think 70 plus folks have already acted on that. I really appreciate that you're providing a collection of tools for people to navigate these values. Here's what's going on. All right, and I was seeing the Hoover chat is very active. Here's 2 or 3 themes that came out. One's concerning. Sarah Brownwell and JD Yoder both mentioned, what about bullying? Would this just kind of an appearance of emotions actually increase the possibility of something like that around you if you consider children? Here's another one from Gabby Espinoza. On the flip side, it could help children become more self-aware, but she adds, but is that likely expecting too much of children? I will tell you, there's a lot of very rich comments that are going on right now. So I and everyone will have a chance to browse through those comments and look at the views that are coming out of, that are being stimulated by that particular card. If we move down to the other card, there's a set of comments on the value tension card. It says, Rob Sleezer says, this could lead to immediate optimizations at the cost of emotional growth. So, another value tension card. Michael Awa says, fairness to all. And so there's probably more to elaborate on there. Value tension identified is JD Yoder, privacy versus empathy. And I'll end that report out with that.
Thank you, Doug, for sharing those. And I want to thank you all for your contributions and for engaging in this design activity with us. I hope what you take away from this is that with really well-honed tools to help and methods to help elicit and engage with values in the technical process, it's really quite possible to do so. You yourselves used the tool, the Envisioning Cards tool, on a design prompt on a technology you hadn't seen before in just a very brief period of time, 3 minutes for each card. And you can already see from the little bits that Doug shared with us how rich the conversation is. So one of the other things that I think is really important is with tools in hand, really well-honed tools, we can do a lot of work in a relatively short period of time that moves us forward. And that is a really important takeaway from the kinds of things that Dave and I are sharing with you today.
So just to build on that, we offer the following 6 VSD takeaways. As Batya mentioned, in a very short period of time, you were exposed to one method and a rich conversation started. There are many other methods with value-sensitive design, and they're there to be used and to be taken and adapted and brought into different kinds of design and engineering processes. As you saw with the Care robot example, we can use human values as criteria for evaluating system performance alongside reliability and cost and utility, our classic criteria. Over and over again, we find it important to consider technology as well as social structure. So working within a policy frame and an engineering frame at the same time opens the design space and gives us opportunities for thinking more broadly about the consequences and implications of technology. So co-design technology and policy together. We think it's important to think long-term and at scale, as the example of the data cloud shows. The planet, of course, is finite and regenerative. And we really do need to engineer within this constraint. The planet, you might say, is the ultimate indirect stakeholder that needs to be front and center as we work. And then finally, there are times when it's important simply to not build, simply to say no. Ultimately, value-sensitive design is a way of moving towards responsible engineering and responsible innovation. I mean, topics that have been in the engineering field for decades, if not a century or more. We think that increasingly values need to be part of best practices so that we can identify cases of negligence, and values and methods for engaging values need to be embodied within standards. One example, a recent example, is the P7000 standard from the IEEE for accounting for different forms of human value within the engineering process. Finally, over and over again in our projects, we've come to these two principles. One is human dignity and respect for stakeholders, and the simple fact that our planet is finite and we need to take that into consideration. Over the years, as I've worked with Batya on projects, she has told me over and over again that we need to focus on progress and not perfection. And I think that this is a key. Progress, not perfection. Finally, coming back to the entrepreneurial mindset, we hope we've shown some examples of how the creating value aspect of the mindset can be considered in terms of value-sensitive design. And we see many opportunities here for intersections and opportunities for allowing both points of view to grow. One strategy for drawing upon value-sensitive design within the entrepreneurial mindset is simply to select a method, bring it into your class, and see how it works, adapt it, see how it works, and then improve upon that method. Our colleagues at Georgia Tech, Adjo Akudzi and Kennedy, and Kari Watkins are doing this work right now, and they gave a workshop just earlier today. In terms of curiosity, I think the tripartite methodology gives us lots of positioning for thinking about and moving forward our curiosity and helping us to imagine through the integration of these different kinds of knowledge. And connection, it's always about connection, working with different kinds of stakeholders within a design process. So with that, on behalf of Batya, I'd like to thank Doug for the opportunity to present here at Engineering Unleashed, and we'll leave it there.
Hey, thank you, Batya and David, for sharing your insights around value-sensitive design. Everyone, please join me in a virtual round of applause for Batya and David. Thank you so much. Hey, we've had a great day. There are a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, we look forward to seeing you again tomorrow morning. Our session starts promptly at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, so please sign on early. Meanwhile, continue to check out the community tab on Whova and also the K&C group on Engineering Unleashed to connect with other attendees. We look forward to seeing you then.